You are listening to Piper Carter, and I am working on some new additions to the show. Um, and so, with that, I just wanted to welcome everyone into um, my podcast that I'm here back at Detroit is Different podcast studio. And what we were listening to is from Prison Radio. You can go listen to it. Where our beloved Mumia Abu Jamal has uh, over 1,800, maybe plus recordings. That one was from January 16th, 1996, um, talking about George Jackson, Rochelle McGee, the origin of, Black August and some of the history of the move. Uh, uh, Holocaust. And so, yeah, we thank you for that. And today, we're in the studio and we're very, very, very honored to be joined by two of our beloved Jericho movement members from Detroit Jericho Movement. So I'm going to turn you guys' mics up. I hope I have your mics up. We'll turn them all up just for now. And I think first I'm going to go, who is that? That's to you. Hey, what's up,
Hi,
Verbena? How you doing?
greetings. Hi, everyone. I'm Verbena, and good to be here. Thanks, Piper. And yeah, it was good to hear Mumia running down some of that history, and some of those folks who he mentioned, like Rochelle McGee, the survivor of the Marin County Rebellion and the massacre by the police, just got out after 67 years in prison. He just got out July 28th, 2023. So yeah. Thank you for choosing that and for having us here too.
Yeah, and thanks for, making the suggestion. So appreciate you. And hey Sarah, you're no
Hey.
stranger to the show. Welcome back.
Hi, thank you for having us this evening and just happy to be here talking about what everyone can do listening and um what we can do and strategize to free our political prisoners.
So I think first so there's so many questions that I want to ask y'all, but I think just in the land of not trying to make assumptions, I want to just unfold for us what is the Jericho movement. And then maybe if you talk Verbena about Jericho movement, and then maybe Sarah, if you talk about Detroit Jericho movement. So maybe we'll go to you, Verbena.
Okay. So the Jericho movement's a national movement. It started in 1998. It was and it's a movement to have the people recognize that there are political prisoners and prisoners of war in the United States, held by the United States, and it's uh, held by the United States. A lot of times people think that's only happening in other countries. Um, and so the Jericho movement is about that recognition and also to gain amnesty and freedom for political prisoners and prisoners of war. And while fighting for that, making sure that political prisoners get the medical care, adequate medical care, that they have legal support, that they have defense committees for all the different issues that come up while they're in prison, and also to get them out. So that's generally what the Jericho movement is, and it was founded by political prisoners. One that was still in prison when he founded, Jalil Muntaqim, got out a few years ago after almost 50 years in prison, from age 19 to whatever, 50 years, almost 70. Jalil Muntaqim and Safia Bukhari and Herman Ferguson. And it started with a march in Jericho, 98 March. And that was kind of the provisional the provisional government of Republic of New Africa had been doing these Jericho marches from probably like the mid 80s till about 1993. And so So Jaleel and Safia and Herman kind of got um, that idea from there, and moved with it. And so um, that is the focus of Jericho.
Yeah, thanks for that. And so, Sarah, tell us about your Jericho chapter, like the origins of it and what you guys have been doing so far.
Yeah, I can touch on a little bit of the history of the Jericho chapter here, Detroit Jericho, and then maybe Verbena can build on things. Let's see, last year, July of 2022, there was a call out from Mumia Abu Jamal's grandson with Love Not Fear called out 40 cities for 40 years, which July 3rd marked 40 years that Mumia was sentenced to death. And across the country, across Turtle Island, cities were going to have actions, marches, and rallies. And so Detroit organized a rally and march in support of Mumia. That was with Moratorium Now Coalition, um, big support there, and also folks in MXGM,
Malcolm X
and
Grassroots Movement.
yes, and Anarchist Black Cross Detroit, and so we had the rally, and we planned to have like a follow-up meeting a week later. And so these weekly meetings have pretty much been happening since then. We call them freedom meetings, and now they're every other Thursday. But so when the connection with some comrades in Malcolm X Grassroots Movement Detroit, and Verbena and I and Moratorium Now Coalition, we started local efforts to support the release of Dr. Mutulu Shakur, who was very ill in prison. Um, and yeah, lot of movement here in Detroit towards Mutulu's release, and thankfully he was released in December of last year, and his may his spirit be at peace now. He just passed away this August. So
July.
or July rather, sorry. So yeah, so basically with the Mumia rally and then connecting together for Mutulu's release, and then working for Mumia's release, there was conversation and Akimba, and initiated pretty much getting the Detroit Jericho Movement chapter going. And so there's chapters across the U.S. There's Oakland, California, Portland,
Boston.
Oregon, Boston, there's Florida, and a few others, and now there's Detroit. And yeah,
Mm.
I hope I did that pretty all right there.
Yeah. So also too, I happen to notice something. I'm not sure if you noticed, Verbena, but you're a white lady. Uh,
No.
so how is it that you've come to center your life, right? Like in this work?
Yeah, well, I think I was telling you when I saw you at Southwest Fest, Piper, that because we were tabling for Jericho, that I try not to be the front person, but do the work, and as far as I come from California, where Black August in the prisons is, a little more known, and where we would have Mumia's commentaries play on the radio almost every day. Um, and so I don't really remember how I got involved about political prisoners, except uh, I understand that a lot of us can become political prisoners, and that people have struggled, and they and been captured and targeted and harmed, and we can't just let them, you know, we can't just forget about them, you know, and so I think it's really important in any movement, to make sure that we are taking care of our political prisoners. And specifically, there's all these elders that were young people. They were in their 20s, some were 19, a few were older, but mostly young people who, they were fighting against police brutality. Joy Powell that's was her thing, was, organizing against police brutality, framed, put in prison, and then people who've been in, just grown old there now. So I feel like it's really critical, for us to center, their freedom, and we learn so much. Like, we learn so much about what they did, but also, their wisdom, their organizing wisdom, their wisdom from the struggle, and also from being, in prison, and continuing their activism there. And so, yeah.
Okay, yeah, thanks for that. And you also came from California. No, Sarah?
Yes.
Yeah, right. Okay. Can you talk about that cultural difference? Because Verbena kind of touched on it, but there is a cultural difference around activism, organizing, the radical left. And I'm wondering, can you kind of speak to that?
Maybe just a tad bit. I haven't been I got active in about 2014, and I won't get mushy on the
And we
podcast.
lived in way Northern California.
Yeah, about five hours north of San Francisco, in Redwood area, ocean and rivers, really beautiful. Everyone should go visit sometime and just be in the beauty. Um, but I met Verbena, and um, she was running a resource. It was all volunteer ran, and grassroots run, donations and everything. It was a drop-in center, a resource center, organizing space, called Park People's Action for Rights in the Community. um and for example, when you walk up, it's in off an alley, and when you'd walk up to the door, we just got this banner out of the storage, and we just visited California after almost 4 years. But there's this banner of Mumia, his likeness of his face, and it says "Free all political prisoners." That's the first thing you would see on the outside. And then on the inside of this, duplex, little unit thing, is just, the walls covered with, pamphlets and old actions and literature, and learning about, you if you kept your eyes closed, maybe you wouldn't learn anything, but if you had your eyes open, you would just soak in so much knowledge and information and books and different things. And then, um so my world, I not only reconnected with Verbena, but we started hanging out. So um and fell in love, and my world opened up beyond the bubble that it was in, to uh running the struggle for people who are, incarcerated and political prisoners, and people on the street. And so about the differences, one big a couple big things is in, 2011, I believe the first hunger strikes happened in the California prison system, and they were organized from people in the depths of prison within the solitary confinement units, and not just in the the solitary housing units, but in like in the depths of those units. What's it called?
The
The
short corridor of
short
Pelican Bay.
Yeah, short corridor of Pelican Bay. And Pelican Bay State Prison is only about 2 hours north of where we lived. Um, and so in that first hunger strike,
Which, can I just throw in?
yeah,
Well, I mean, there's lots of hunger strikes in prison, but this was focused around 5 demands related to long-term solitary confinement. Because California, if you after George Jackson was assassinated in California, if you mentioned his name or read his books, which are award-winning books, or you could be put in solitary just for that, and many other small things like that.
right.
So they had this horrible, practice in California, and so finally, people across races and stuff start organizing, to end those policies.
The indefinite solitary confinement. So uh it was thousands the first time, and then
About 6,000-7,000 people.
yeah, and then just the demands are basic, like adequate food, and I don't remember what the simple demands were, but it's nothing, extravagant for people in prison to just want to have dignity. But then in 2013, the l- uh, the largest hunger strikes happened, and there was 30,000. The prisons records say 30,000 people, including people outside of California prisons, went on hunger strike for almost 60 days, I think 59 days. Um, and a lawsuit stemmed out of, I think, those hunger strikes, which did end up getting people out of solitary who had been in for decades. And there isn't any more
Officially.
official indefinite solitary confinement. So like, say someone does, because see,
Can
one thing I want to zoom in on for a second is um the the court system doesn't put someone in solitary. When you're sent to prison, then the people that work in the prison decide, oh, we're gonna put you in the shoe. It's not a sentence, it's a punishment within the prison.
Yeah, just thinking about the month of August and related to those hunger strikes, there were these, hunger strikes happen in prisons, right? So the guys who started, these ones about indeterminate, indefinite solitary confinement, and also, changing these gang validation rules and ending collective punishment, um, and adequate food and some basic human rights things. Those were the demands. They were organizing. Across race lines, which was a big deal in California prison system. And and one of the things they did, as they would go on hunger strike, and then the system would say, "Oh, okay, those are reasonable demands. We'll do it. We'll do it." So they would suspend the strike. So they did that 2 or 3 times. The second time, they ended up drafting a thing with about 20 men, 18, I think, drafted, a thing called Agreement to End Hostilities. And a lot of us believe that powerful and historic document, where they were saying, look, if we keep fighting each other, that's what the system wants. And if we can cease hostilities, deal with our stuff, one on one, but cease these hostilities, then we can, make things better for ourselves. And so, that was a very historic document that came out August 12th. So that was a Black August, seen as a Black August, important event. And we think that led to the success of, at least 30,000 people within the California system going on hunger strike and ending indeterminate solitary confinement, including Hugo Yogi Bear Pinel,
Mm.
who was a political prisoner from age. Well, he changed to a political prisoner, but he was a targeted, Black Nicaraguan at age 19, and he was part of the San Quentin Six. So when um, George Jackson was assassinated, there were six people in San Quentin who were accused of killing a guard, or and they were all acquitted. But the system kept um, Hugo Pinell, who was a comrade of George Jackson, who walked the yard with George Jackson, who was considered the heart of the prison movement. George Jackson, the strategist, and Hugo Yogi Bear Pinell, the heart. Um, the state of California kept him in solitary confinement for almost 46 consecutive years. So Hugo Pinell was, so on August 12th, 3 years later, after the agreement to end hostilities, Hugo Pinell had been released from solitary after 45 years and 11 months. And he was finally able to hug his family and to, you know, be out of the hole, and they moved him to old Folsom Prison, where and at the behest of the system, the California system, these two white other prisoners murdered him like 2 weeks in on August 12th, 2015. So I don't know, like Mumia was saying, August has all this, it has massacres and it has resistance, and it's, and so I want to remember Hugo Pinell and, yeah, uh, and just get, and also, get back to just making sure people know, and I'm not going to assume that people don't know, but the U.S. has tried very hard to convince everyone that we don't have political prisoners in this country. So it's really important for folks to know that and to speak about it.
So thanks for that, Verbena. So on my other podcast that I do on Mondays on Black Power Media, it's centered on women in hip hop. And for Black August, I've been focused on just looking at women in hip hop, and I talked about Remy Ma. And when she got out, she went on like this tour, media tour, I guess, just talking about getting out of prison. And one of the things, or one of the main things that she's was really centering and uplifting is that women in her, what she experienced was that she had a lot of visitors. She had a lot of letters. She had a support system. Her husband, people were there for her. Um, she, people gave, people, they were interested. And she was saying how she met so many women who were caregivers, mothers, um, just the person that had been assigned as the caretaker, right? And she noticed they weren't getting visitors. No one was checking on them. They weren't getting mail. No one was like making, giving them care. Putting money on their commissary. And so she wanted to like talk about that, right? She went on this tour really just uplifting that and talking about that for like a while. Um and on that show, and this one too, I wanted to uplift some of the women as well. And I know that you guys said that you're not necessarily like the experts on Joy Powell, but I wanted to see if either you or Sarah could, because I talked about her case, and how to help her on that platform on Black Power Media. I wanted to also uplift it over here. So I wanted either you or Sarah, do one of you guys feel comfortable to talk about her case?
You do you want to start off, and then maybe I can pull up that email that Anne
Well,
sent
I
out.
printed
You
it,
did?
but
Oh,
but
good. Okay.
also, so we could share it, I guess.
Yeah.
Um, One thing I do know about Joy Powell is one way to support her, like, directly is through New York City Jericho. So it's nycjericho@gmail.com, and if somebody wanted to, I know they send her packages and visit her and, support her that way. Um, so but recently, so I don't really know much about her case except that I know that she was a community organizer and was framed for some kind of robberies or something like that. And political prisoners are sometimes been framed, um, but they've been captured because of their involvement in
Mhm.
liberation struggles or actions against capitalist structures or their involvement in different organizations against police violence, state violence, and things.
Hold on, can I interrupt you 1 second? I'm
Mhm.
gonna put it on the banner. So, can you say the website one more time?
Yeah, well, it's actually an email because I'm gonna
Oh, it's an
space out
email.
the website if I
Okay.
try that. So it's nycjericho@gmail.com, and they do a lot of direct support for Reverend Joy Powell.
Thank you.
Yeah, and so, so I just kind of have an opportunity to just say this about political prisoners and prisoners of war that Jericho, supports uh, political prisoners who were framed and also who were in struggle and in battle against the state or against the, oppressive oppressors, and all the same, it's not like a judgment and all this, because political prisoners and prisoners of war are just that, they are captured um, for their involvement and struggling for freedom and for the people, so, and for the earth. So so Jericho, it supports people, um, whatever their story is, whatever their case is, that's not really the point. So, but back to Joy. You wanted to hear about Joy.
Mhm.
Yeah, so gosh, there's been bugs and just terrible conditions in the prison in New York for the women there, including Joy Powell. And um, a recent update, I think, is that the prison uh, sent like exterminators to one unit.
Well, people called.
Oh, and
Yeah.
demanded for it, right?
New
So
York City
that's
Jericho said, "We need
yeah,
to call because women are infested with bugs." And actually the person in the prison who took pictures
got
got fired for doing that, but the pressure, which is what we have to do from the outside, is pressure for anything to happen. We have to support the people inside. They can fight it from in there, and then we have to, make it clear that we know what's going on too. And so they fumigated like there's a certain sections, but not the whole place. And it
yeah.
was the
It's like
first time they did anything like that in
and
16 years.
right.
So
Wow. But there's a way people can help too, because the I keep saying and I don't. Anyways,
mm,
fans for friends. Uh, the prisons often aren't don't have air conditioning or fans, and it's summertime and it's very hot and dangerous. So I'll say this Bitly link to donate fans for the Bedford. I think that's the name of the
mhm.
prison. It's bit.ly, so bit.ly/ capital B, so that's Bedford fans, capital BEDFORD, capital FANS. So bit.ly/ capital Bedford capital fans. And people are collecting donations to purchase little fans for the women in the New York prisons. Um
I wanted
We'll put it in the description too.
Great.
Cool.
Mhm.
And I think there's also a push to get, um, to get fumigation of the entire building at Bedford Hills as soon as possible, or it's just gonna get bad again. But, Piper, when you're talking about, women and caretaking and some people having support, and one thing that, like, a former political prisoner, Kathy Boudin, who just died last year, she did and she did a significant amount of work in prison. Um, she was a young mother when she went to prison, and so and they did collectively created like lessons about how to raise your kids from prison. And when she got out, did a lot, just continued for the rest of her life, like, in New York. Um, Doing work with, a lot of women who had been in prison, women who still were in prison, and then, was one of the founders of RAP, Release Aging People in Prison, which in New York, the movement, has been so powerful that that's why there are, um most of the or all of the political prisoners from, like, the '60s, '70s, and '80s are out of the New York prison system now. There was a lot of organizing around who was on the parole boards, and a lot of organizing around elders getting out and the elder abuse that people experience in prison. And that is, often a focus right now. Like um, one of the things that we're asking people to do at this time is for Ed Poindexter. And Ed Poindexter is in prison in Nebraska and has been for 52 years. And so he's, almost 80, and he's ill and he's in a wheelchair, and they still won't let him out. It's like they pretend like he's a danger. And he became a political prisoner as he was a young Black Panther. And then in Omaha, they had the Committee to Combat Fascism, and so they targeted him and his comrade, and who died in prison. And so right now we're calling, and um, we're asking people to demand that Ed be able to see a reputable doctor outside of the prison to determine that he has this, like, really, that his condition is irreversible. And that is a step towards getting him Nebraska's version of compassionate release. And that's what we've had to do now with a lot of political prisoners because they're old. It's like we have to say, look, they're um, so sick and old, and you should let them out. And it's called it's some form of compassionate release. So we do have calls to action like this for Ed Poindexter.
Yeah.
So go ahead, Sarah.
I was just gonna say if you want more information like on some of the things we've mentioned, you can go to at Detroit Jericho one word. And we're on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and our email
YouTube.
is and YouTube.
Mhm.
Yeah, same thing at Detroit Jericho, and the YouTube is Detroit Jericho 98 at gmail.com.
And our
Yeah.
email is that too. Yeah.
So I want to pivot to more of the folks that you were highlighting this weekend. So you can go ahead and go into people's stories, and we know that uh, I'm gonna put up here on the banner, where your social. But if you could go into more folks so that we can lift up people's names, because um, just thinking about Remy Ma's statement in that it's not only the women, right? It's everyone that goes away to prison that people forget about them. And that is the socialization, the stigma, and then also to, what you know, networks do we have to uh, keep people's names, highlighted, or to keep their stories present, in front of people? I think um, independent media, really does the best that we and it can, and more and more that we're highlighting and uplifting and saying people's names. There's people who watch all of our media. And, we want to get people's stories out there. We want people to know that people need support, that, people want, uh, look forward to letters and phone calls and possibly visits, and that people are um, working to still live in with dignity, that people are still supporting people so that they can live right in dignity. And I wanted to maybe live in that kind of idea and question for you both a little bit, because you both spoke to being in this because you're wanting to support people to get free, and I guess the just transition of it is that they live in dignity as you're working to get them free. And I think the concept in general, I spoke about this on the other show, the concept of prison, or the idea of prison, really is rooted in the idea of like punishment.
Mhm.
That, like, who deserves, like, even just the concept of like somebody deserving something, right? Or somebody not deserving something. And so, um, we had this conversation so many times, like, what uh what are our alternatives, if you will, right, to prisons and policing. Um, and as we're working on, right, like dismantling these systems of oppression, while we're working on dismantling prisons and police and courts and bail and all of that, there are people who are also caught up
Mhm.
in the system currently. And yeah, like, how much of our movement, can we, I want to say, like, lend to that or push on that. And for me as a Gen Xer, I feel like um and also just being in a more radical family base, I guess for me it was normalized to talk about political prisoners, or to see their names pushed forward, or to have relatives that were working on all these campaigns. Um, I think although there's been a lot of energy to uplift the idea that America has a lot of political prisoners, and Malcolm X's grassroots movement has been doing this a long time. Jericho's work is centered on this, and Mamiya has done a lot to be a voice and bring these issues to the forefront, not just for himself but for many others as well. And now it's more visibilized, right? The idea of like supporting political prisoners. So I'm wondering, um, and maybe it's a question for both of you, and like when you can decide who to take it first. I'm just thinking, like, in this moment that we're in, right? 2023, we're in August 2023, Black August. We named all the atrocities that happened in August. We're about to go into a vicious election cycle, right?
Mm.
um Maybe people like us are not necessarily as concerned about electoral politics, but at the same time, um there are very real, material, dangerous policies that have people currently oppressed, suppressed, right, in this thing. And I'm wondering, does any of your work or work adjacent speak to any like current policies that people also need to be thinking about? So that's like one idea, I guess, wrapped within that. um you spoke, Sarah, about internal policies, right? Because uh there's a inside world and outside world, and you spoke about this inside world that's very different, right? You said, although um the choice punishment that has been inflicted upon people of the solitary confinement, although that's not a an official, right, like designation or a policy within a court. It is a designation and a policy within the system of prison, right?
Mhm.
And so I guess I'm also wondering, like, within the so-called like outside world policies, right? Like, what bearing does that have when that inside world, like these policies, and like, so I guess it's a double question, right? Like, what are the policies, like, and I'm gonna say on the outside world, that we need to be paying attention to, and then like, what, like, do those policies have any bearing on the way things are carried out materially, like on that inside world? That's what I'm kind of wondering. And I don't know who wants to take that. If you or Sarah want to take that one, or is it like, or do you know, or are you like, wow, pipe, I wasn't prepared for
Well,
that?
I want to back up to one thing that you were saying, and then try to move into thinking about the questions. But did you have something right
No, I
now?
took notes, so I'm okay for a second.
Okay. Um, I was thinking about how um Piper, you were talking about like the mentality around, which we're all kind of taught, like the mentality around prisons. We get taught different ways, but that's the system we have as a punishment. And you do this is what you get for it. And some people get worse. But that's like still the indoctrination, right? Is about punishment. And I just was thinking about an additional message that comes with political prisoners, and that is, you do this, you struggle against this system, and this is what happens to you. Like, that is the message, right? That's the message to everyone else. They punish the person, and their families and their communities, and they're warning everybody, like, this is what will happen. And I think um, it's important for us to recognize that that's part of the motivation, and then that's also why we have um, such brilliant and caring and dedicated people who are in prison. And I was thinking about this time a few years ago in Detroit. August 22nd. People might remember August 22nd into the 23rd of 2020 was this huge police attack on people on Woodward, I think it was, right? It was super violent, and fortunately, people weren't um, kept in jail or sent to prison from that. Um, Although there were people up in Grand Rapids who were sent to prison from 2020. But I was just thinking about, like, that mentality by the system to say, you wanna talk about getting rid of police? You wanna talk about defunding police or any of that? You know, we will hurt you, and we'll imprison you. And so anyway, I not anyway, but I was just thinking about that as you were formulating the questions. Did you wanna Now I'm sort of just hanging here, but
Yeah. So about dignity, humans, all humans deserve dignity. Um, some of the work Verbena and I did before, we I think I could speak for Verbena that at some point soon we would like to get more plugged into helping and struggling with houseless folk here in Detroit, because that was uh, work that we did in Eureka, California. Um, and that has to do with dignity as well, because people who are living on the street, um, by society and by the system, are treated like they're worthless. They don't deserve, anything. They don't deserve basic, simple things, let alone nice things. And the same can be said for people in prison, thinking that, well, you did something wrong, you deserve to get punished. Um, or or the first question that comes to people's minds, like someone's in prison or you're talking to people about political prisoners, what did they do? Well, maybe they did something, maybe they didn't, but is prison really the answer for things? So that those are larger things, but I did want to just highlight about dignity, and then in prisons and policing, and trying to move away from those structures, which seems impossible and crazy. And why would we get rid of things that seemingly um, keep bad people in and away from us, and police keep us safe supposedly? But I don't think those things. I think that the origins of the police are rooted in racism and white supremacy. They were slave catchers, um, and patrols for African people when people were brought here, and so that was hundreds of years ago, the inception of the police. People on Turtle Island, indigenous people have were existing and didn't have police. Indigenous cultures all over the world didn't have police with badges and brutalizing weapons of terror. People solved things in other ways, and resolved issues in other ways. So to think that with anything, whether it be artificial intelligence or technology, and we're just moving forward, onward, like that's just the way it's going to be because that's the way it is and it's developing. Well, that doesn't have to be that way. So it does take more conversation, and more than just conversation. It means like creating systems and community, and actually having community, and more than just me talking on a microphone and sitting in a comfy chair. There's real life issues and problems that, life and death and pain and struggle and hurt. Um and one thing I wanted to mention is a program, is an organization, Detroit Motor City Mobile Wellness, and they're working on um a vehicle that can be a mobile wellness vehicle, for times of,
Like an ambulance.
yeah, yeah, within it would be without police involvement. Um, and that's just one vehicle. We need that vehicle. We need others like it in the city. We need others like it around the country. We need things, to dream big, and we need the people with the money to put the money into services like this, for the people. But in terms of policy, that was making me think like, wow, I'm not really in touch with like a lot of legal or legislative things that might be going. Like, I think of Michigan Liberation is really good the with legal and litigation, like legislative change, and people who are formerly incarcerated working in this organization. Um and I think Michigan Liberation would be a good resource to talk to, and to go to their socials, and to talk to the people themselves, to find out how you could get plugged in, or just to learn more about like petitions, or
Hmm.
what to vote for and what not to vote for. But I think the basic things I've been doing has just been talking to people and wearing a pin, with Mumia's face on it, or um
Like that.
yeah,
I don't know where you can see.
and just
Wait,
acknowledge.
show that again,
Is that
Verbena.
like that? Do I go like that? You made these.
Yeah, I mean, acknowledging the existence of political prisoners, and giving um I mean, and acknowledging the dignity that is within them, the humanity that is within them, and these people who have been behind bars for so long are inspiring to us on the outside, move us and encourage us, and how much more in how I mean, how much more can I be, it's like it's very kick in the pants sometimes to be like, oh, yes, we have issues. I have issues and problems and things, but I can go out my door and go walk in the grass, and breathe the fresh air and feel the rain, and yeah.
So, were you gonna say something, Piper?
No, go ahead.
I just wanted to say the names, like you were, mention some
Mhm.
people and also get, thank you, Sarah. This is, um, get to the heart of things. Um, because we want people to hear their names, get involved, write letters, and We're doing a thing every other Sunday called Freedom Words. It's beautiful. And we've been going to Clark Park every other Sunday and writing letters and reading words from political prisoners and about them. We bring books, we bring literature, we bring food. It's all free. We bring addresses. And so there's going to be one on Sunday, August 27th, this coming Sunday in Clark Park, right across in the park, across from the front of Western High School, the doors. But Mumia Abu Jamal is in Pennsylvania prisons. I'll just kind of run down some of the people who we've been doing support. Mumia, we thought has maybe had a legal chance recently, but what we know with him and with political prisoners in general is that you can't just rely on the legal system. It has to be the people. The people decide when political prisoners get out. And I think the people decide generally if we're going to keep imprisoning people or not, So Mumia Abu Jamal is a journalist. We heard him in the beginning of the show. You can find him on prisonradio.org along with other imprisoned correspondents. But we'd say that's the house that Mumia built, maybe the prison radio. And he has been giving commentaries from death row for 27 years. And then when he got off of death row, just very frequently talking about everything that's going on. He's a brilliant journalist and writer and speaker and freedom fighter. So uh, we support Mumia, and we're probably moving into a new strategic time for him because we had this big letdown in May, beginning of May. So we're trying to figure out the next move while he's studying for his PhD and probably writing his 14th book in prison. Um, Also, Kamal Siddiqui, our group hasn't done a lot of direct stuff with Kamal, but they have meetings to free Kamal Siddiqui, the international campaign to free him every Monday night. Kamal Siddiqui was a political prisoner 50 years ago and then started raising kids and everything, and he has the quick way of talking about him, his situation is he has a daughter with Sada Shakur's an exiled former political prisoner. She was liberated from prison in the 1970s, so she's been living in Cuba, and the government came after Kamau. He was free. He was in the world doing community work, raising family, and they wanted him to turn in Asada or tell them information, and he wouldn't. So they framed him, and now he's an elder in prison, um, political prisoner. We want him free him all.
Say his name again.
His name is Kamau Siddiqui.
And spell Siddiqui.
It's Sadiki.
And this is so all the names that you'll hear are also on the Jericho Movement website.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. We're scrolling it now at the bottom of
All
the
right. And we have lists. If anybody wants to email us or connect with us on social media, we have lists with addresses. People's some people have new African names, and the names you have to write them in prison. We have guidelines on things to do or not do when you write people. Let's see, Veranza Bowers Jr. Um, he's a federal prisoner, so he's being held by, and he had a parole hearing in May of this year. So we're hoping he's going to get out soon. He actually was about to be released almost 20 years ago. He was walking out the door. This is how they do political prisoners. He was walking out the door. He was well respected by the warden where he was. He's a healer. He plays this Japanese flute and has healed people for years in prison, and makes this beautiful music, does meditation, does different spiritual practice in the prison. And who was it? Antonio. He was the
Is it
attorney general at the
Gonzalez?
time, Gonzalez. So Veranza Bowers was at the door of the prison about to leave, family outside ready to get him after many years. And Antonio Gonzalez called and said, no, he's not getting out. And even the prison officials were like, what are you talking about? This man is ready. And they put him back in prison. And that was almost 20 years ago. So Veranza asks us to send him good vibes and to listen to his music and to pray for him, and to
You can
he
you
created
can
an album called
yeah.
Finding Peace in the Chaos.
Yeah. That's what I was gonna say.
Yeah. It's good for him. It is good for us too. We listen to it almost every night. And it's on Spotify, Finding Peace in the Chaos. It's on YouTube. Um, let's see. Sinatli, who's also known as Alvaro Luna Hernandez, is a Chicano activist. He is also he's in a Texas prison.
Spell his name.
So the name that he uses is Sinatli, which means seed. It's a Nahuatl word, an indigenous word, and it's Xinachtli. And his, legal name is Alvaro Luna Hernandez. There he is, Sinatli. And he's, really good organizer.
Is this him?
That was him with the beard. If you go down a little bit.
I'm not even seeing the screen.
This
That's
This one?
yeah. And people like stories or context and stuff, so I can just do some quick of that. But essentially he was this really powerful organizer in Texas, and the sheriffs came to his house, and one of them pulled a gun on him, and he disarmed the sheriff and ran. And apparently they created the biggest manhunt in Texas, found him, beat him, and put him in prison, and he's been there ever since, just for disarming a cop that pulled a
He
gun on
was an
him.
outspoken activist, and yeah, the whole reason they came up to him with a gun in the first place.
Yeah, and like we've said before, people continue to be who they are in prison, so they continue to do organizing, activism, healing people, teaching, political education, some would say converting criminal tendencies to political people. And let's see, Oso Blanco. He's an indigenous political prisoner. He's coming out with a book right now, and we're hoping to get it at Source Booksellers and at the Shed and other places in Detroit. He's an artist, and Oso Blanco became known by the system as Robin the Hood.
Is this him or this him?
That both of those, yeah. He's older in that top picture. And he was supporting the Zapatistas in Chiapas, and he was robbing banks and putting the money where it's more appropriate, sending it to the struggle. So that's also Blanco.
Beautiful art.
And can you talk more about his story? Or do you know? I could read it if not.
Well, we put together some. Well, I would like to read this one quote of his, if that's okay.
Yeah, please.
In an interview, he said, "I'm still able to hold my head up high and feel the gratification for my work in a world where money, power, and destructive industries are regarded far above humanity, indigenous and impoverished peoples and cultures. I cannot help that I got deeply into my work." Um, well, this is the same page on both sides. I didn't mean to do that, um, but he ended up in a escaping like a
They couldn't
shootout.
catch him for a
hmm
while, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think he did a lot of more expropriations than he was busted for, which I think sounds good. But another thing that we haven't mentioned, which is so central to political prisoners from who are still in from the 60s, 70s, and 80s, are the FBI's COINTEL program. Stood for counterintelligence program, and that um, targeted Marcus Garvey, going back, targeted Martin Luther King Jr., targeted, said that essentially like the Black liberation movement. I don't think they said Black liberation, but Black freedom movement was like this big threat to the United States. That's what the FBI was telling itself, and so they proceeded to assassinate people, to disrupt, to infiltrate, and try to neutralize and destroy not only the movements but the people and the leadership in the movements. So that is, the core targeting philosophy that was going on, and I think is still going on. But Leonard Peltier is another indigenous political prisoner.
And spell his name?
His last name is Peltier, Peltier. Um,
Which one you wanna use?
oh, a picture.
Mhm.
I think the one on the left is good. It's an old, or yeah, it's a younger picture, but
This?
all the way up top to the left, he's
This one?
laughing.
Okay. Mhm.
Leonard's an artist and a grandfather, and he is part of the American Indian movement. He was one of many activists who went to the Pine Ridge Reservation when the people there were being attacked by the government and by even like the co-opted um, Indian government there, and FBI agents come there and uh, invade the territory where people were living, and ended up shooting one of the people with Leonard, and a couple of the agents were shot, and Leonard went up to Canada, and his two co-defendants went to trial, and they were acquitted. But when the system found Leonard, they decided he was guilty of aiding and abetting the two people that just won their cases, and he's been in there for 48 years, I think now. And even the prosecutor from his case has said that they should let him out, that it wasn't, he shouldn't have been in there in the first place. Like all these like government people and stuff, and of course people all over the country and the world want Leonard Peltier free. So let's see. Talked about Mumia. Uh, One of the things that Leonard Peltier's committee is asking people to do right now is to call the Bureau of Prisons, which is the federal prison system, to call the director and call for an end to the lockdowns, and in particular because of how harmful it is for the elders, but it's harmful for everyone when people in prison are locked down, meaning they don't have access to phones, to showers, to outside, to the few things that they usually have access to when there are these lockdowns. They don't have access to like medical different things. So there's a call-in campaign for that. Um, and you can connect with us about any of these things. If one of them's like, I want to call or I want to write this person, again, we're on social media at Detroit Jericho, and we try to make ourselves real visible so we can be reached. And um,
And our email.
oh yeah, Detroit Jericho 98 at gmail.com. We're also involved with, some of us are involved with the Spirit of Mandela Coalition, which was initiated by political prisoners and former political prisoners, and did organized a international tribunal charging the United States with genocide against Black, Brown, and Indigenous people based on 5 charges. One of them, um, the 5 charges are, police killings, environmental racism, political prisoners, uh, hyper and mass incarceration, and healthcare racism and disparities. And so we continue to organize, and there's a lot of cross pollinating with Jericho and Spirit of Mandela, and we're trying to network people. We call it the People's Senate. And soon in Detroit, there will be a lot of information about the People's Senate, and hopefully folks will get involved. It's a good way for us to just share information, keep doing the work that we're doing in the community, the different kinds of struggles, and just have them amplified, more people knowing about and supporting each other. Let's see, who else do we
So I guess also too, there are so many. Well, I guess we were having this conversation that anyone that's in prison is a political prisoner because the system of police, courts, prisons, all of that is political, regardless, right? And the people that are on the Jericho website are people who have engaged in freedom struggle, right?
mhm,
Um, you talked about it, you kind of touched on it. People that are in freedom struggle, how they are treated and targeted, but we know that people in general are targeted, right? Like children, poor people, elders, the unhoused, people with mental disabilities, people with physical disabilities, um, people struggling with employment, um, people who struggle to take care of their basic needs, people who go to work every day, women, um, LGBTQIA plus people, um, you know, just people, right? In general. Can uh, how familiar are y'all with um the I want to say I'm gonna okay, opinion alert. I think um in the activist community sometimes we get kind of like insulated in our worlds, and it's kind of like all of us are doing like activism work. Okay, so wait, it's Detroit Jericho
98.
98. I'll fix it. So we get caught up in our activism work, and or at least for me, let me speak for myself. I get caught up in my activism work. Sometimes I um don't necessarily I want to say like remember, and I hate to
Yeah,
say like
wanna.
regular people, but that a lot of the stuff that we're talking about, it could have a feeling, or people have expressed this like y'all activists this and y'all activists that, and there's like this separation between like the ideas of like who deserves to be fought for, meaning if someone was engaged in freedom struggle, these are the people that we're going to fight for, But if someone did something that's considered, I'm gonna put air quotes around a crime, uh, not so much.
Mm.
So I'm wondering, do y'all have, experience um talking about that at all? And how do you talk about it with your folks, right? Cuz like how do we get more people to, number 1, I'm going to say, just understand, right, when we talk about abolishing police and abolishing the carceral system, um that that's really foreign to people, because all people really know is a system of punishment. And so, and we don't necessarily have we have systems of care, but they exist in certain ways, right? And we haven't built whatever needs to be built, um so that we can uh really care for one another better, right? So that we're not continuing this perpetual um uh the be in this like perpetual like um way in which we're just continuing to harm one another and cause more harm, and then people get locked up, and then because when folks get locked up, it's not that they get any of the supports that they need. They just have to go in and become more, um I want to say, brutal, right? Just for like survival's sake. So I'm wondering, like, how have y'all been talking with, like, let's say, your cousins, your aunties, your friends, your people you went to high school with, right? Who may be afraid of the radical left. And maybe you talk the same. Like, I don't know. But I'm always just curious, like with activists, like how are we bringing more people in? And while you do that, I'm gonna put the proper put the proper email up. But I'm wondering, can you share a little bit about that? Or I don't know if you or Sarah wanna take that.
Um, Lately, I haven't had like the sort of contradiction or discussion about whether everybody's a political prisoner, why you focus on just these people. Haven't been uh, kind of, I don't know if the word's challenged or had that kind of discussion. Um, but I think it reminded me when we were preparing for the July 3rd, 40 years for 40 years of injustice, commemorating when Mumia Abu Jamal was sentenced to death in 2022, that Blair Anderson and some of his family came to help us make banners. And we ended up making one because we were having a discussion about people in prison, period, not just political prisoners, but and so our banner ended up saying "Free Mumia, free our people," because that was the suggestion that came out. So I just was remembering that, but also just thinking about like one of the ways that I think that this work that we're doing with Jericho or to free political prisoners um, can be a connector, rather than like it's like a separate thing, is just just focusing on people's who they are and their personal situation and the humanity in it. And then I think um um it somehow spreads, like if we can talk personal about Major Tillery. He would not have been considered a political prisoner. He's been in Pennsylvania prisons for a long time, and he's a jailhouse lawyer, and he actually saved Mumia's life because he told people that he was really ill at some point, made them take him to the hospital, and he keeps getting targeted, right, for doing stuff like that. But I guess um I think yeah, the more that we engage with people who are in our situation. We're talking about political prisoners. It's a way to talk about anybody who's in prison, and also to have some positive effect, like even strategies, right? Like strategies that people use often with political prisoners are used by organizations that advocate for people who are in prison, right? Like you learn how to call prisons and how to, get past this busy signal or whatever, and who to write and how many to do it all the time. And so I don't know if I answered your question. It just got me thinking. And um,
Well, I guess, at the heart of it, we commemorate Black August, we uplift Black August, so that we have a space where we dedicate the time to the study and uplifting the conversation about political prisoners. And then with that, there's, if people are doing the exercising, the fasting, the study. But I think in general, Black August for me is a bit different than other months that have commemoration times, because um I guess it is such uh an opportunity to look at the month of August, like we opened up with when we had talking about the uh I want to say, like, the power of the month of August and all the things that have happened in Black existence, through for Black liberation in the month of August. And he also opened up his commentary talking about George Jackson, which is the origin of Black August, right? So I guess if you're in activism, if you're in that world, you're going to be a lot more aware, because it's a big thing, Black August, right? Like everyone's kind of practicing together, and you're kind of checking in with each other to ask each other, like, what are you reading? And you're probably doing study groups together, or exercising, or fasting together, and you're like in that world. But then, like, for instance, I
and that's really the prison. Oh, sorry. And that's really the prison movement world, whether they were, you know, captured as activists or not. It's just like people inside prison, studying and all that. So I was just pointing out that I think Black August too is like not always focused on what we call political prisoners, but just like people in prison, sort of like working on themselves, probably more than I do, but working on themselves. And
yeah, and so on the outside, right, if you're an activist, you're gonna be hyper aware. Malcolm X grassroots movement, was doing the Black August concerts. I know they do one in Cuba. I don't know if it still goes on.
Mm.
But I think for the most part, a lot of, let's say, like, the rest of the community doesn't necessarily talk about Black August. I know they've turned August into Black Business Month. And I think there's like an awareness that, like, a lot of Black stuff happened in August, but I think they always try to, like, recapture Marcus Garvey, as a capitalist. And let's have Marcus Garvey t-shirts and Marcus Garvey sales at Macy's or whatever. But I guess I'm just thinking about, you know, um the ways in which this can be an opportunity to draw more people in. And that's really where, I'm very interested in general in all my work, whether it's cultural work, podcasting, putting together concerts, magazines, anything like that. It's like, how do we draw more people in? Because it's very easy for people to not see their space in this work, because it could look like, even myself, I never thought of myself as like an activist or like an organizer. I mean, maybe because I was like raised in a family that was doing this stuff, but I always saw like my uncle as like the activist, right? Because he was the one who was super studied. He was the one that was out there getting beat up and protesting and resisting. And he was the one, going to Ghana and setting up, exchange program. And it felt like I was more interested in like arts, but I think I've been able to find my way through arts and culture and find my way to share or like bring people in through arts and culture and media, right? And um I think sometimes people in my conversations as I've listened to people, what people have told me is like, "Oh, Pipe, I'm so proud of you. You're doing all that activism stuff. Go get them."
Yeah.
And it's like, "Oh, but you have a space in here too." And it's like, "Oh, I'm not really into all that." Right? Or like for instance, this weekend at Southwest Fest, I was with Detroit Action and supporting doing audio stories, right? So collecting audio stories and asking people. Thank you, by the way, Sarah, for giving a great audio story. But like asking people a question around the connection between the corporatocracy, meaning this in Detroit, we have this monopoly energy company called DTE who overcharges people, gives bad service, and cuts people's power off. Then people need power for all types of things, whether it's for their dialysis equipment or to get on the internet or to have lights or to cook or whatever, right? Um, and so we had a whole campaign, Work for Me DTE, where we're bringing awareness. We have been banging on the commission, if you will, just like snitching on DTE and just telling, like, hey, you guys got to do better. But I'm saying all that to say that it's a monopoly company. So everyone in Southeast Michigan is basically like on this company. That and Consumers Energy, but they're all like the same thing. So also too in our Southeast Michigan region, like many of the cities, most of us have gone through what was like called emergency manager, which was financial martial law from the bankruptcy, right? And so with that, a lot of our cities became bottom lined and all of that. And I'm saying that to say that there isn't anyone that's been here for the last like 15 years that hasn't experienced some terribleness of the corporatocracy of DTE. Even if you're so-called rich, right? Even if you're like privileged or whatever, there's only one company. So you will have experienced like whether it's through a storm or whether it's through getting cut off, their bad service and their rate hikes. That's something everyone has in common. And so in going through the crowd and asking people to look at the connection between poverty, which is like we always want to look at root cause between poverty and and the ways in which this corporate entity is like cut people's access off and how uh people are harmed, right, in this way, and like what uh the criminalization that happens, right, when you just compound, right, like all the things that people go through. And so many of the people that I would talk to were like, well, either like I don't they like a lot of people just don't see that connection between um how people are criminalized and how these corporations have control
Mm.
um like over the things that they need in order to be like safe and whole and all this kind of thing, or they just didn't want to talk about it, right? And so what I find interesting is because I'm in all these different meetings and community meetings, some of the spaces that I'm in, DTE representatives are like in those spaces,
Mhm.
like speaking, like um in spaces where they shouldn't be, right? Like government spaces where community members are supposed to be, and they're speaking against like community owned solar, right? Or they're, trying to shoot down ways in which people can win. Let me just put it that way. And so as we're going through and we're listening to people and people are saying things like, well, I don't want to, I don't have anything, I don't think anything, I don't have anything to say. I think as I've uh pushed them a little bit, as they, would think, like one young man in particular, as I started like probing him, then he was like, well, I am a returning citizen. Well, let's put it this way. He started with, when I asked him, what's your vision of the world that would be different in the way you want to see things different? He did say, if in my world we'd have Walmarts everywhere and Nike stores everywhere. And I was like, okay, that's interesting. But but he was like, that's his world. I said, okay. And as I started to probe him a little bit more about the question, he was like, okay, well, I am a returning citizen and I see what you're saying, how is more difficult for me as I've been trying to gain employment, or, whatever ways, and how I could see how things are a bit difficult, and I could see how them making decisions over things makes my life more difficult. But it wasn't until we had like this like exchange for a little bit, and I kind of like really probe and probe and probe, that he actually started to really think about it. And I think his initial approach to me, or his initial response was, yo, I'm not an activist.
Mhm.
I don't do this. And it was like, my challenge was like, okay, but you're impacted by these things. And so, what are your actual thoughts about it? And I think with um, the ways in which activism, and I know that's a dirty word in even activist circles, but the ways in which resisting against oppression is presented to people, I think it becomes romanticized a lot. And so people look at it like, well, I'm not Malcolm X or Martin Luther King, and I haven't done those types of things. But I think as we're talking about, we're actually talking about resisting against oppression, and we're actually talking about sovereignty and liberation. And so I think as we have this conversation, I'm relating that to the conversation around the political prisoners. That as we have these conversations around political prisoners, I think it's a bit difficult for people to really understand the gravity about political prisoners in general, but even to have the bandwidth to try to um, put energy towards, right, like supporting um, political prisoners.
Mhm.
Yet and still, there are people um, who are constantly doing this. And so, all that burden, all that labor, all that energy is kind of on this like really tiny group of people that have been keeping this going for decades, right? And it's a lot of work. You talked about writing people, you talked about keeping relationships, you talked about understanding the system, you talked about navigating the system, you talked about developing strategies, you talked about helping people have access to basic needs, dignity. I mean, and just keeping their campaigns going. And it's a consistent tireless work, because we know that the origins of this country and the Western civilization is in oppression, and that's where they got their wealth and all of that. And so it's just the way they, order of the day, status quo, how they do things. And so resisting against that whole thing, frightens people, overwhelms people, like, but again, there are people who are doing it. So how do we bring more people in? How do we, you know, help people understand that there is a place for them,
Mhm.
right? Like to be involved. There is a place for them to, support, and it they don't have to have a master's degree in social work. They don't have to be an attorney. They don't have to be an expert. They don't have to be, uh, well studied or well read. I know we want people to be all of those things, but, some of those ways in which we present that actually also become barriers for
Mhm.
people not seeing themselves as a part of the solution. So I'm wondering, like, and maybe that was a lot, but these are the thoughts that I'm thinking as how do it's like, how do we get to how do we fix this? But I'm wondering, with the Detroit Jericho movement, how maybe the bigger question is, how are y'all going to grow your movement? and bring more people in, because we do have Malcolm X grassroots movement who's been doing this work. Only so many people are going to be able to, like, get this done. It's going to take a lot of people to get this done. And how are y'all going to grow the movement? And, like, how do people, what is it that people can do to support the Jericho movement? But then also, yeah, what if I don't know all these things like you guys know? Can I be a part of the Jericho movement? So I just want you guys to talk about Jericho movement a little bit more. And who wants to take that one?
I can go for a second. Yeah, so just to before I go into how people can get involved, or I just wanted to talk about like something you touched on, Piper, about like why it's important to know and care and struggle for our political prisoners. I think as I was reflecting on what you were talking about, I think something that it comes down to is compassion for yourself first, so that it can extend toward people who are in a totally different situation than yourself. Uh, and I'm working on my compassion for myself and gentleness towards myself, like all the time. Um, but just like I think Verbena mentioned as well, like i- if you've protested or are speaking out against the system, the government, or wrongs in general, um, you potentially are at risk, to being a political prisoner, because they exist for decades, and there's stop cop city political prisoners now, and there's people that were in 2014 who are political prisoners from the Ferguson uprisings. So having having your heart extend out from we get bogged down with so much that we have to endure, whether it's your own familial world, and then you extend it out to what's happening in your neighborhood, your town, your city, the climate, the earth is suffering. There's so much that can bring you down. And you can't fix everything or change everything all by yourself, so it does take rest and working together. So love for the people. If you feel like you want to help, and maybe you're feeling moved um to get involved with Detroit Jericho, it's it really just it means just a little bit of time, here and there, of maybe coming to a meeting every other Thursday, or coming to Freedom Words every other Sunday. Like this Sunday, the 27th, 4 to 7 at Clark Park, uh, where you can write a political prisoner, or just listen to their words from books or different writings, and talk with people who are like-minded and caring towards people who have struggled for us. Um, but yeah, I don't know. I was really thinking about like in any type of activist work, whether it's to defend the earth, or fight for people who have been locked away for so long, or even like animals, protecting animals and different things. It's kind of like you're extending your love towards someone else. Um and similarly to what I was saying earlier, how my world opened up from like my life and my family and my friends, my social network. um it's kind of like a floodgate, eventually someone, a comrade said, I was telling her like, I keep my head in the ground like an ostrich sometimes because there's just too much to take in. It's overwhelming. And she said we don't really have any other choice but to confront things head on. And I was really moved by that because although I do think there's balance and we need rest and self care, and there's times to just kind of like maybe zone out for a little bit, but the earth and our lives and humanity don't necessarily have time for like communal zoning out. So, um, just kind of letting that floodgate and then letting the waters flow of love and compassion, and asking yourself like, what can I do? And so at Detroit Jericho, on social media, and um, yeah, sorry, that was a long. That was long. I was just very moved by thinking like, why why care for, yeah, because like I don't even know exactly why, you know.
I was trying to see what some of the comments. I can't really see the.
Well, people are just, saying hi and giving just saying peace to y'all.
Peace.
And so man, like this has been a really interesting conversation, and it's already like we've been on here like an hour 40 minutes. I'm like I want to let us all go home, get some sleep. And we don't only have to talk about this during Black August. I want to talk about this during Black August. That's important, but we don't only have to regulate it, to an annual political prisoner conversation. So I know y'all always come. So, keep coming back like anytime.
Yeah.
And I mean, you said how to support, right? It's on the scroll. It's also in the description, and you've laid out a couple of folks that people can support, but there are many more,
Mhm.
right? And so how do you guys want to like wrap up?
Well, I have two things that I I definitely want to. I want to just talk for a moment about Dr. Matulu Shakur because I don't want to leave without doing that. But just on a practical, like that was the word that I kept thinking because I understand how people are like so much just every day just to survive, and just like what's a practical how do we do things in a practical way, and so I was just thinking for Detroit Jericho, some of these things that we kind of like encourage people to do, like come to freedom words. It's just mellow, it's just mellow. Like everybody, not everybody who comes by knows anything, knows anybody's name, political prisoners' names, but we sit there and talk, and you can, people write a letter to somebody they never met before, and then they probably end up getting a letter back, and that deepens things, but or just come by and eat some food and just check it out, and also even sometimes some of these like calls to the prisons, it's a little intimidating, or it's like I put it off sometimes, but then when I do it, it takes about 3 minutes, and it's very empowering, and that it works, so those are some practical things I was thinking. And yeah, and I had other thoughts, but like we're getting tired too. So, but I did want to, say Dr. Matulu Shakur's name, and just I was thinking about Mama Shoshana Shakur, and here in Detroit, always saying he was a healer, not a killer, because that's what they tried to accuse him of, sort of. But he was a healer, and he also um, did a lot of work and writing and organizing around truth and reconciliation, and the idea of amnesty for political prisoners, meaning having political prisoners recognized, and prisoners of war, himself included, recognized as such in an international setting, in an international way, so that you go, well, this was the situation that was going on. This was the political, you know, uh, context, and there was a war, whether the U.S. wants to recognize it or not, and so that would have been, covering a lot of people, not this like this person, we're going to get this person out, we're going to get this, but establishing that sort of classification. So, but Matulu did a lot for the people, loved the people the whole time. He's in prison for almost 37 years, and I was not super familiar with him until the last several years. But I've been reading him and talked with him a little teeny bit, when he got out, and there's going to be some learning in Detroit about the acupuncture, the acu-detox that he innovated, and helped a lot of people. A lot of people get off drugs. A lot of people deal with trauma. That's what that protocol helps with, among other things. And I just wanted to say his name here, and always hold him in high regard and love, and Dr. Matulu Shakur. So, and just say, free them all, free them all.
Thank you. And then, Sarah, did you want to leave us with a word?
Free 'em all. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in, and thank you, Piper, for having us.
Thank you both. And thanks to the Jericho movement. And thanks for starting the Detroit Jericho chapter. And everybody go check out your socials, Detroit Jericho, Twitter, Facebook, and also Detroit Jericho 98 at Gmail. Contact you. And then the JerichoMovement.com. And then, of course, come back here every Tuesday. Detroit is Different Podcast Network. Check out Piper Carter on Piper Carter Podcast. I'm going to be bringing you more great stories from the community. We're still in August, so as long as we're still in August, we're still doing Black August. And then hop over to my other new podcast where I talk about women in hip hop, but I'm also doing Black August on there, and talking about women, the intersection of women in hip hop in the carceral state for the month. And the name of the new podcast is Beyond Breaking Barriers, centers women in hip hop. So the title comes from, I want to say, looking at the different waves of feminism, and where maybe the beginning waves were all about like representation, and then the next waves were maybe more about um, pushing to get to certain places, right? To like break barriers, if you will. And I think for me, in this next phase or wave, it's about beyond just breaking barriers, right? You don't want to be like anomalies or like exceptionalism or buy into all that, right? When it's beyond the breaking barriers. So uh talking about, yeah, from the perspective of imagination, the perspective of building, and like what's next. And so that's like the context of it. But go over to Black Power Media on YouTube and check me out. That's Mondays at 8 o'clock. So shouts out to everybody over there. And then come back here on Tuesdays for Detroit is Different. Shouts out to Kari Frazier, and check me out here for Piper Carter Podcast, where we talk about all kinds of things. And just want to thank everyone for listening. And it's pipercarterpodcast.com and Piper Carter Podcast on Instagram and Facebook. And join the Facebook group so we can get the conversations going. So I just want to say thank you. Thank you to all the listeners. Thank you to everyone in the chat. Shouts out to Always First Class Media. Shouts out to Ben Frank. um I think is E3 God. I think that's who you are. And yeah, appreciate and Kari Frazier was up in there, to my cousin, my art, my rules. And yeah, want to thank all y'all for coming through in the chat. And like, share, subscribe, and let's keep this movement going. Uh, free them all and free the land. Peace.